Welcome in to another episode of the 40 Acres Football Podcast. I'm Justin Gooseman, joined with Robert Gonsolin and Joseph Duffy. The stakes only rise, folks. Quarterfinals out of the way, semifinals, that's what it's all about. Two of the biggest brands in college football, the Texas Longhorns and the Ohio State Buckeyes in Dallas amidst a winter storm in Texas. There's a lot to talk about, but first, before we get to that, I want to reflect on one thing, one major aspect from the ASU game, and it's something we've talked about all season. We knew a game was going to come down to it. We saw glimpses of it in the SEC championship. We've seen it throughout the year. Burt Auburn, he really struggled, and I know Joe, you talked about it quite a bit. We were not confident in if a game came down to his leg late. And sure enough, it came down to his leg not once, but twice, and he failed to convert both times. So that was a major talking point, not just from Texas fans, but from the rest of the country. Seeing Burt perform on a big stage for the first time, it's kind of new to all of us. And Steve Sarkisian today said that they were not going to commit to Burt Auburn being the kicker. They're going to monitor it in pregame. So I want to get y'all's thoughts on that because I know that monitoring a kicking situation and making that a game time decision is really, really tough. That's an interesting call. So we're going to see how that plays out, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
I mean, this is quite literally the worst time to have a kicking controversy. The absolute worst time. And like you were saying, I mean, I cannot believe that Bert Auburn, actually, I can kind of believe it because I thought that he didn't have that many high leverage kicks really in his collegiate career. And to see him, miss those two crucial kicks in the Peach Bowl, that was just, it was hard to watch. I can only imagine how he would feel. I'm sure he received a lot of vitriol in his comments or on social media towards his way. And I also didn't like how Steve Sarkisian was trying to really hype him up. You usually don't do that with a kicker, just like how a managers do that to a pitcher before he's like, he's going through like a no-hitter or something. You usually don't do that. You usually want him to be in the zone and nobody to be really near him. I didn't really like when Steve Sarkisian did that, but it was very hard to watch from Bert Auburn and to see him miss, especially that kick to win the game after his team drove it down. Arizona State's defense in that last drive, after it looked like they were about to choke the game away and have a chance to win in regulation, and still found a way to miss it, heading towards overtime. That was just hard to watch. So, like I was saying at the SEC championship, after the SEC championship, he hasn't had many high leverage kicks. He saw it right there. What has happened yet again with Bert Auburn? He couldn't really make it when it really mattered the most. And I'm anxious to hear what Robert has to say. Does Will Stone have a chance to kick in this game in Dallas, or is it going to be up to Bert Auburn again in the clutch?
Yeah, it's interesting because Burt Auburn going through the season wasn't really needed a ton in the game until about the OU game when he kicked about 2 for 3 on field goals. He missed one against Michigan. He only kicked one against Colorado State, but from about UTSA all the way through Mississippi State, and you add on that bye week, you know how many field goals were attempted? Zero. And now I know that's all the way on early in the season, but we're starting to get to these games later in the season where the SEC championship, the Arizona State quarterfinal game, where he's attempting about 6 field goals a game. SEC championship, that was 6 field goals. ASU, I think he attempted about three. He missed two and he made one early on in the game. But my point here is he hasn't really had to be show up as consistently until these later games in the season. And obviously those are the more higher pressure games. Those are the games where you really need to lock in and drill those field goals. So I don't know if this is a product from him not having attempted too many field goals in one game early on in the season, or if it's just straight up jitters he has. Now, I've never kicked a field goal or an extra point in my life, but I've always seen it as that's a very superstitious position to play. You've got to you're on when you're on, you're feeling it when you're feeling it. And for me, covering that game, being there, I always thought, okay, the first field goal that Auburn missed, okay, I understand that was high stakes, but he missed it. All the jitters are out. I was almost actually kind of curious that, if Texas has another chance to kick a field goal as time expires, Bert Auburn would feel much better the second time around, even if he missed the first one because, he got all his jitters out. Well, the fact that he missed another one as time expired, it really tells me he must really be in his head right now, and it's just a lot of pressure on him. I think it's all a mental game for kickers, and I think that issue is really getting to Burt right now.
Yeah, I would 100% agree that there's something mental going on with him. I mean, he's made the most field goals in school history. I know that's hard to believe. Like, he's only 8 points all time behind Cameron Dicker for the all-time leading scorer at the kicker position in Texas football history. Second thing, that's two field goals on in that stadium in two separate weeks on the exact same goalposts that he's missed at in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. He missed a couple in the SEC championship game going that way. He missed a couple in the Peach Bowl going that way in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Where's the national championship being held? Mercedes-Benz Stadium. If Texas gets all the way there and Burt Auburn is still the kicker, that's going to influence multiple things. That's going to influence which way you want to kick, which way you want to defend. That's going to influence how you approach end of game scenarios. Are you trying to get every last yard possible, maybe risking clock management over just getting into field goal range and attempting a kick? So there's a lot at play here. One, mentally, I don't think that you can do this to your kicking unit heading into the final game or two games of the season playing this whole, oh, we'll see who's better in warmups. I don't like that. I think there has to be an answer behind the scenes already. I think Sark is going to go with Burt, or if he's going with Will Stone, he's already made that decision, and those two guys know who is going to kick. I think the only reason he's saying that right now is to make sure that Texas fans know that he's addressing it. Because there's a lot of scrutiny over that right now. So I think those guys actually know who's going to be kicking the ball. And then I also think that, going into Mercedes-Benz for a potential national championship, that's a huge storyline and a kicker that struggled in that building. Could be the dome. I believe Burt had a really good game at the AT&T Stadium last year against Oklahoma State. Don't have all those stats with me right now, but maybe he can get his confidence back if he's the kicker going into that game. But that's all we're going to focus on for the Texas ASU matchup. We know that was a classic, but that's a week behind us, so we're going to look forward to this game tomorrow in Arlington between Texas and Ohio State. And the first question I have, does Texas have the advantage in any skill group? Out of all of the skill positions, I don't know if Texas has an advantage in any of them, much less a whole lot of them. So give me your thoughts on that. Which matchups do you like? What positions do you think Texas has the edge?
So, what I've been telling people all week is Texas, to start things off, they have the talent to win this game. I don't know if they have the execution. I think Texas wins the defense battle. Not in this game. I'm just saying head-to-head matchups here. They win the defense head-to-head. They win the coaching head-to-head, I would say. And I know Quinn Ewers has struggled multiple times this season, but I think they win the quarterback position on a head-to-head comparison. They win those three things. Now, with that being said, though, there has been a scare in a lot of games and that has dealt with those three types of matchups I've said. Quinn Ewers has struggled. We've seen him struggle the first Georgia game We saw him make a mistake in the Arizona State game with throwing that interception. We've seen him make mistakes in the Vanderbilt game. The defense, we saw them let up against Clemson. We saw them let up against Arizona State. People were wondering why Steve Sarkisian was throwing the ball to the end zone in overtime against Georgia right off the bat. They're wondering why we're throwing the ball on third or on 2nd and 4 when that ended up in an interception. All those things to say is those three head-to-head matchups I just mentioned that Texas is better in, they've also had some hiccups in. And so I think that Texas, with those three things, defense, quarterback, and coach, I would say those are the three most important things you probably need to win a football game if you're going to pick to have a better side of the matchup. But they have the talent. I don't know if they have the execution just because we've seen slip ups. We've seen Texas slip up nearly in the Clemson game. They obviously slipped up in the Arizona State game. They lost the Georgia game in the SEC championship. The Kentucky game, kind of a scare, but Texas ultimately won. But the A&M game, there's a little bit of a scare there. I mean, I can keep on going, but I'll take it all the way back until maybe the Vanderbilt game. The one game since then where Texas probably didn't scare themselves at one point in the game was probably Florida. And so I think Texas wins the coaching, quarterback, and defensive battle. But in order to win this game fully, they have to fully execute all 4 quarters on that and can't afford any hiccups.
Similar to what Robert was saying, I do think that Texas wins the coaching battle. I do like Steve Sarkisian over Jim Knowles, who's a very great DC. We know how great he has been. Oklahoma State fans are still mad that Gundy didn't keep him um, in their halls in Stillwater. But it's really about the players and how the big time players show up in this contest. And specifically for Texas, I think the run offense, if that shows up, anything can happen for the Texas offense. We've seen over the course of this year throughout Texas's wins, um, they run the ball a lot, obviously, but when it's not going well, it's not pretty for this offense. And you saw an anomaly really in the last game in the Peach Bowl against Arizona State, where they carried the ball 30 times for 53 yards against a mid-tier rush defense, and somehow they couldn't get anything going, and they still found a way to win that game in double overtime. Now, that Arizona State defense was honestly not that great defensively in terms of rush defense, which makes it so crazy that they found a way to only limit the Texas offense to 53 yards. But this giant that you got coming up in the Ohio State Buckeyes, they know how to play the run well. They're probably the best run defense that Texas has played besides Georgia this year. I really do think they could really go head to head, I think, in Georgia in terms of rush defense comparatively. But Ohio State's defense, run wise, is no slouch, clearly. They held Oregon, who's a great rush team as well, to negative 23 yards in that game at Autzen earlier this year. Excuse me, in the Rose Bowl last week. So I really do think that this is going to be a tough test for what I think is an advantage for Texas, actually, when you compare the offensive lines. I think Texas has the better offensive line, but the thing is, the Ohio State front seven is very good as well. So I don't know if there's a real advantage Texas has besides, the skill players. If anything, I would say the O line against defensive line.
Yeah, I think the biggest mismatch, or when you're comparing Texas to Ohio State, excuse me, when you compare those two teams directly, like you said, I think it's the Texas O line that's a little bit better than the Ohio State O line. But if you go position by position, I would say running backs, I think Ohio State has the clear advantage. Now, Wisner has more rushing yards than Henderson and Judkins for Ohio State. But I think when you watch those two guys play, there's a different gear that they can reach in the running game comparatively to Jaden Blue and Quintravion Wisner. There's a little bit more explosiveness. Wow, I can really not talk. Um, but then if you want to look at receiving, I mean, Ohio State has Jeremiah Smith, Egbuka, and Carnell Tate, who are all fantastic wide receivers. I think they win that matchup. Now, if you get the Isaiah Bond that Texas fans thought they were going to get at the beginning of the season, then it's a little more even. But even in that case, I think Ohio State clearly has the advantage on the wide receivers. You look at tight end, that's where Texas really wins that matchup. Gunnar Helm is a much better tight end than G. Scott, and then Juan Davis. Hey man, Juan Davis is a good run blocker. Every time I see him out there, I know that he's gonna be blocking his tail off
Run his way every time.
every time, every time. Run Juan Davis's way. Um, and then at quarterback, I would give the edge to Texas there. Will Howard's never beat Texas in his career. Will Howard is a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. I don't think he's an elite processor. He doesn't have elite arm talent. He's got two fantastic wide receivers and a really, really good running game behind an O line that has protected him well throughout the season. Um, but I think Quinn Ewers is the better quarterback there. So it's a tough matchup because I do know some people saying that Ohio State wins in every single skill group. I don't think they do that, but I think the advantage they have in the run game and the advantage they have at wide receiver are big enough to make the gap between Quinn Ewers and Will Howard a little smaller, or between Gunnar Helm and G. Scott a little bit smaller. You're not going to see the gaps in their play a whole lot because other guys on that roster are going to elevate Howard. So it's tough. It really is tough. To Robert's point, Texas is going to have to play four full quarters. They can't fall off in the third quarter like they tend to do every single game. It doesn't matter who they play in the third quarter. They don't score. They don't move the ball. They let other teams in the game. We saw it against ASU. Like they don't play well in the third quarter. That's going to have to change.
I'm also really curious to see then, you mentioned Justin, the Jeremiah Smith in the wide receiver core with Ohio State. I do think that they're better than Texas's wide receiver core. If, like who knows why Isaiah Bond show up this game, and Texas, they have the Thorpe Award winner, the best defensive back in the country this season, Jahdae Barron. It's interesting to see what they will do with him because I've been hearing things like, now does Texas, do they match Barron up with Igbuka, and then they put Manny Muhammad and a safety in double team Jeremiah Smith, and then maybe you have Jalen Gilbo take on Tate. But it's interesting. Who will Barron match up against? And I understand the lining Barron up against Igbuka because Smith, I'd rather double team him. But if you're gonna double team him, you want to be able to put one of your best defensive backs still on another great receiver. So it's almost like, do you have two great DBs or your best DB guard Smith? Because there's no point. You have a decision to make.
I also wonder if you're Ohio State and Caleb Downs, speaking of the Thorpe winner and Sade Barron, if he thinks that should have been his award, and if he thinks there's something that he should prove against this Texas offense at safety now. So honestly, of course, we know he returns punts as well. You saw him return a punt against Indiana a few months ago in that highly anticipated matchup that ended up being a blowout in the horseshoe. But, matchups like that, where I think like the Texas defense, I think they can hang in there actually very well against this Ohio State offense. Now, they looked a little bit shaky, a little bit tired against the Arizona State offense, who I think overachieved in that game in the Peach Bowl, with Cam Scatterbo literally doing every single thing possible to give the Texas
Including
defense
throwing the
trouble.
ball.
Dude, they didn't even count the passing touchdown, his, total yards from scrimmage, which is, I mean, of course it makes sense, but like still, like he threw a touchdown, bro. And of course he ran one in, and he also got to receive as well from the line of scrimmage. So he did literally everything possible for that team. I don't even blame Texas defense from having trouble in that fourth quarter. It just seemed like every single thing was going against them defensively. And much to the credit of Kenny Dillingham, that was a well-coached game, I thought, especially in the fourth quarter, and his part trying to give the Texas defense everything they could handle. But when I look at the Texas defense, they're so talented. They're deep. They have a lot of playmakers. We've seen Michael Taft We've seen Jahdae Barron, of course, Anthony Hill, and also Colin Simmons, who is just he's kept on getting better throughout this year. I really think he can have a chance to have a good game as well. And so Ohio State offensive line, who mind you has been beaten up this whole entire year. What you see right now is not the line they had in the beginning of the year at all, but they found a way to really make it work and gel and play well for Will Howard. So I think the Texas defense can actually hang in there well against the Ohio State offense, though they have a lot of receivers. He mentioned Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate. I think that, you know, it's college football at the end of the day. I mean, everybody's going to put on pants the same way, going to lace them up the same way as you. Why not be doubted? Why not take the disrespect? People are already counting you out, right? And so this Texas defense, which finished statistically the best in the country, I don't think this is any challenge that they're not really accustomed to, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, best defense in the country going against an offense that has been unstoppable the last couple games. Robert, you brought up if Jade is going to shadow Jeremiah Smith, maybe he's going to shadow Emeka Egbuka. I don't think they're really going to adjust their coverages a whole lot. I think for the most part, it's going to be a zone coverage with Jade on whatever side he feels the most comfortable, and then um, you play in the Pete Kwiatkowski defense. And I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of man coverage. I don't think you want to go man on Jeremiah Smith anyway, regardless of how good Jade Barron is. That's not a risk that I think Texas wants to take. So I don't think they're going to do a whole lot of shadowing. I think it's really going to be a lot of zone coverage too high, beat us on the ground, and if you can get open in the zone, you can get open in the zone, but don't let anyone go one on one. Don't let them try to take advantage of those matchups. That's what I think we're probably going to see more of. But at the end of the day, whatever the coach's game plan is, if they go in and execute, that's going to be the determining factor.
And look, I know Chip Kelly's not Colin Klein, but do you think we see a threat of Will Howard on the ground? I mean, the offensive line is definitely much better than Kansas State he had last year, I think. And I haven't seen him running too much with the great receiving core he's had this year. But you have to think, does Texas defense, if they try to spy Will Howard maybe sometimes, even though you're not shadowing somebody else, say on the receiver side, do they try
I
to shadow, at least spy Will Howard maybe in
I
case of a
don't
threat of the ground?
I don't think they'll try to shadow or spy him. But I definitely think that Ohio State is going to utilize him in the running game a lot more. I mean, Levitt, when he got out of the pocket and was able to scramble a little bit, that's where they really started to take it to this Texas defense for ASU. And then that's also how Ohio State won that game against Penn State early on in the season. Those last couple drives was just pound the rock and then read option, let Will Howard make a play with his legs. And I think that's probably going to be how they have to neutralize this Texas front that's been so dominant over the last 8 weeks.
I don't want to take anyone's anyone's words here or ideas, but I've been listening to a few college football podcasts this week. Um, JD Pickell, Josh Pate, and I think multiple times I've heard, as good as Ohio State has been playing, and as as kind of kind of sloppy Texas looked against Arizona State, we could be seeing a progression from progression to the mean and regression to the mean, meaning Ohio State's been playing super well these past couple games. Who knows if that momentum will continue? Yes, they are favored, but who knows if that strong dominance will persist into this game, and we may be seeing them kind of regress back to their average normal style of play that we saw in the regular season. Meanwhile, Texas did not play normally as well as they have against Arizona State. We might see them progress back to their average style of play in this game. And I do think there's going to be a little progression between both teams in this game. And while one team will have the edge in Ohio State, I will say I think it will be closer than what people are kind of expecting based on the past couple of weeks of play. Also, I wanted to also flip from my point earlier. Uh, I'm really curious to see who Caleb Downs decides to decides to guard or who the defensive coordinator decides to put him on. Because y'all mentioned Caleb Downs a second ago. You know, Isaiah Golden, he's emerged as the wide receiver one on this team. He's been making plays. People saw how good he was on the national stage last week. But Isaiah Bond is still Isaiah Bond. While he's been hurt a little bit, he's still just at his peak play. He's still just as good a receiver as Jeremiah Smith. I may get some people who disagree with me, but I'm saying at playing at his best, I think Isaiah Bond, he's up there with Jeremiah Smith. And so it's going to be interesting to see if they play man, will Caleb Downs line up against Matthew Golden, who's been having his best games of his career, or Isaiah Bond, who, when healthy, is a top level threat at wide receiver.
I mean, when you make your progression regression points, you saw really just a glimpse of it, honestly, in the Peach Bowl, man. Like Quinn Ewers looked unrecognizable in a lot of that second half. They couldn't move the ball. They couldn't do anything. Then all of a sudden, in the fourth quarter, they found a way to move the ball and almost give it to Burt Auburn to possibly win the game. And then in overtime, fourth and 13, almost similar to a fourth and five national championship on the line right here. Texas fans of this generation finally get their moment, and Quinn Ewers with a perfect dime right in the bread basket for a falling Matthew Golden. And then from that point on to Gunnar Helm and then of course the Texas defense does the rest. But Quinn Ewers finally looked like what we thought he should have looked like the entire game. He started off well with that two-play drive to put them on the board, and then just kind of looked unrecognizable for the second quarter and the third quarter and most of the fourth quarter, really. So when you talk about that, that's also a good point when you also mention Ohio State. I don't know if that peak that they're having so far these last few games lasts forever. I mean, this Texas defense is going to be the best defense, honestly, that they'll play in the past few games. I don't know if you can really keep that up. I don't think they're the offense like we saw in 2020, like the Alabama Crimson Tide, where it seemed like they were always just firing and firing, like with Steve Sarkisian's offense that he had with Mac Jones and Devontae Smith back then. I don't know if they're that kind of offense. We've seen their lows and how they've struggled to be consistent, especially in the game against Michigan like a month ago. We've seen what they look like when they get rattled and when they get pressured by a good defense. And I think that Texas fans, knowing that they've beaten Will Howard, that the Longhorns have beaten Will Howard, that is, multiple times over in the Big 12, I'm sure that's playing in his head. He knows that record. And I really think this is any man's ball game, to be honest.
Absolutely. But fellas, you know, Texas fans of the past had their moment in a national championship. A quarterfinal moment is totally different. They're going to need plenty more of moments like that in order to come away on top of college football at the end of the season. So, with that said, what is the path to victory for Texas in this game?
Joe, I'll let you start with this one.
Well, like if I were to say this point, I feel like I'm just going against what made them win the game in the Peach Bowl. And I was gonna say run offense, which has been the main source of the majority of their wins, but they found a way to go against that grain in the Peach Bowl. But I'll say it again, it is the run offense. I think Trey Wisner has to get going, and it was very disappointing to see how the run game really couldn't get going against an undersized and run defense in Arizona State that was not nearly as good as what they're going to get against Ohio State. Good thing though for Texas is that Cameron Williams, the right tackle, is returning in this Cotton Bowl matchup in Dallas. We saw him get beat up in the first round game against Clemson. Hasn't really played since then, but he is returning, so that'll be a jolt for this offensive line for Texas that has been a little bit shaken up recently, but it's been majorly healthy for the majority of the year. We've seen Kelvin Banks deal with some lower leg injuries as well, but he should be fine to go as well. We've seen Gooseby, who's also stepped in well for this Texas offensive line over the year. He's been, yeah, another goose, I guess I should say. But yeah, this has been a great offensive line for the majority of the year for Texas. And I think that if they play well, like we've known them to do in the past, and they can protect Quinn Ewers, they can get this good run game going because good run offense creates great play action. And that is how this Texas offense feasts, not just in the air, but also on the ground. I think Trey Weiser can get going against this front seven bit by bit. It doesn't have to be by, ripping off a 15-yard run or 20-yard run. You just need to tire this front seven of the Ohio State Buckeyes and win the time of possession, which is also the second point. Winning time of possession for this Texas offense, keeping that offense of Ohio State off the field because they can get going as we've seen this past 3 weeks of action. They can get going really fast with the likes of Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka. Keep them off the field, win time of possession. And then thirdly, the defense of Texas has to find a way to get off the field, winning third down. Of course, when you have those big third down opportunities, Pete Kwiatkowski has to find a way to get his defense home. I don't really think he's going to send as many blitzes on the first and second down, which is why I think that when you get to third down, you have to find a way to get home on Will Howard and keep them off the field. So run offense, run offense. The second point is keep everything going. And then third point is, Texas defense, finish it off well.
Yeah, I think Texas to win this game, Joe, you make some great points right there. I think the run game and keeping Ohio State off the field is extremely key for Texas if they want to win this game. You don't want Ohio State to chew up clock. And I feel like in Texas's games where they've lost, the run game it hasn't been there. So both Georgia games, the run game really has not been there. And they almost lost the Arizona State game. Run game was not there. I will say yes, that needs to happen. Additionally, I think Texas Quinn Ewers needs to be comfortable and actually go for it when it comes to throwing the ball across the field. And I don't mean downfield deep balls, and I don't mean check downs. I mean Quinn Ewers needs to not be afraid to throw the football and hit Gunnar Helm on the shallow cross, or hit Matthew Golden on the in route, or hit Isaiah Bond on the shallow post. I'm not talking about check downs. I'm not talking about deep balls. I'm talking about like 10-yard explosive plays down the middle past the linebacker or before the linebacker. And I know that some of those picks that Quinn has thrown this year have come from those types of throws. But in order to really like get comfortable and looking, I'm not going to compare. I'm not going to say Quinn needs to play like he did against Alabama. Yes, yes. I mean, you should want to play like that because that's what won them the game. But I'm maybe comparing this to Quinn's performance in the Big 12 championship last year. Same stadium. Quinn was not afraid to throw upfield, midfield, not deep, but midfield to his receivers. And I don't think you play conservatively, but you actually go for it. Not in terms of go for it on fourth down, but you go for it. You bite when you can. You go and throw it across the field when you can. Second of all, I think that keeping Ohio State off the field is key because when you're on offense as the Longhorns, when you're on offense, you need to chew up as much clock as possible. One of the flaws that I saw with Texas last game is when the second half started, the reason why Ohio State had so many chances to score was because Texas would go out there and would just go three and out immediately. Now, three and outs, punts, those are going to come because that's just football. That's the nature of the game. But what I'm saying here is you can't just go first down, second down, third down, punt. You need to get on the field, run a few plays, get a first down, maybe run a couple more plays, and then maybe you're okay with punting. But you can't have three and out immediately. Maybe get one or two first downs, and then if you have to punt, you need to punt. But by doing that instead of going three and out immediately is you're chewing off more clock and also putting Ohio State in worse field position to score and giving them less time to do so. So with me, I think it's Quinn Ewers in the offense. They need to throw across the field more for more 10-yard plays, not deep balls, but just like 10 to 12-yard burst plays. And also really move the ball when you can and keep Ohio State off the field. And that, Joe, that goes with Texas needs to run the ball better.
I think the run game is absolutely key. Um, like you said, the two games that we were unable to run the ball, Georgia, and then Arizona State, you give them a chance to get back into the game because you're not able to run the ball and chew any clock. I would say though, the keys to the game for me, Texas has to punch them in the mouth early. Like they've done all season, you have to capitalize in the first quarter. If you let Ohio State get off to a hot start, like we've seen the last couple games, they don't let anybody back into the game. Tennessee, it felt like they had a chance. They scored a couple times, cut into the lead. They could have got a stop, get the ball back. You have some momentum. Ohio State shut the door on that real quick. They went down the field, put put up more points against Oregon. Dylan Gabriel goes downfield. They score before the end of the half. They get the 2 point conversion. They're getting the ball to start the second half. Felt like, if there's a chance for Oregon to get back into this game, they need to do it right now. And then Ohio State shuts the door again. Game over. They score, put the nail in the coffin, right? Texas has to punch Ohio State in the mouth early. You have to take an early lead, and then it's anyone's game. If you let Ohio State go out, they score once, you go three and out, or you punt, they score again. I think that game's already over. The way that they've played the last couple of weeks, I don't think Texas can get back into that game. So if you punch them in the mouth early, it's anybody's ball game. Second, they have to win the turnover battle. You're playing against such an elite team that it's not enough, in my opinion, to just win the time of possession battle. Like Joe and Robert, you both talked about, you got to win the turnover battle because if you take possessions away, that's going to mean more than any amount of time that you spent with the ball. So those are the two things for me. Obviously, turnover battle is always going to matter, but Texas cannot afford to get off to a slow start. They have to punch them in the mouth, take an early lead. Then it's anyone's ball game. Even if Texas lets them back in the game, you gave yourself a chance by not letting Ohio State get out to that early lead. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and drop my prediction. I know, Robert, we got to let you go here in a minute. So I've predicted Texas to win every single game on this podcast. This week, that's coming to an end. I I really don't think the matchups are favorable for Texas this week. And with the way that they've been playing, coinciding with the way that Ohio State's been playing, I just think it's a really tough matchup. And so I'm gonna say that Ohio State wins 32 to 27. It's a close game. I don't think Texas gets blown out, but I do think that Texas goes down this week.
You know what? I can't say that I hate that prediction at all. I've picked Texas almost every single time on this podcast as well, and I might have to agree as well to go against them this time. I really don't like the matchups a lot. I think it'll be a close game for sure. It should be another shootout that we saw last week between two historic programs, two historic college football teams with great coaching. I think Ohio State can win this game. And I think it comes down to the last possession race, similar to what we saw in the Sugar Bowl last year. Can Quinn Ewers get over the hump and win a game for the Texas offense? I don't know if he can with the game on the line. And also factoring, say, Burt Auburn with the potential kick on the line. I don't really trust um, either of those two when it comes down to that against the Buckeyes, who usually in the clutch don't really find a way to fold. So I'm gonna go with the Texas Longhorns losing this game to Ohio State. I say Ohio State wins this 35 to 32, and maybe a missed field goal is the source of that. Sorry, a little
You
bit extra
know,
there.
I'm gonna follow in both of y'all's footsteps here, and as hard as it is, I just think Ohio State is just more explosive and just flat out wins more position battles that it's just gonna be hard for Texas to keep up with them. I feel like Texas will go out of this game actually playing really well and playing one of their best games of the season, but Ohio State is just much faster than them. And I feel like Texas will be playing a lot of catch up in this game. Ohio State will go up early. Texas will match that. And then maybe Ohio State scores one touchdown at some point in the middle of the game that gives them about a 10-point edge. And I could see Texas scoring late to bring them within maybe one score. But I just feel like there would be a lot of catch up played in this game with just the explosiveness on the Ohio State's team. I think Texas unlike the two Georgia losses, I think Texas will go out. If Texas loses, this is going to be their best loss, meaning they played the best. And I think Ohio State, I picked Texas all season long, but I think Ohio State's just a little bit more faster and explosive and can will be able to score more easily, as good as that Texas defense is. So my prediction here is going to be Ohio State 35, Texas 24.
You heard it here first. Robert says Texas is going to be playing a lot of catch up. The Longhorns might need the spirit of one Bijan Mustardson if they want to win this game. But regardless, we're going to be back here next week to either debrief on a long and fruitful Texas football season, or we'll be back here next week with the national championship preview. So we appreciate y'all for listening to us here on the 40 Acres Football Podcast. For Joseph Duffy, Robert Gonsolin, and Justin Gooseman signing off. We'll see you next week.